Hello, and welcome to Subplot of Course. Today, we are going to talk about our latest book that we read. We'll follow up to A Princess of Mars, The Gods of Mars. But before we get to that, let me introduce my fellow hosts. So first, we have epidemiologist and part-time fisherman. Say hello, Vincent.
No, I'm really Stavros, but hey, I'll say hi anyways.
Nice. Aerospace engineer and Star Wars appreciator, John.
Is it my turn? Do I go?
Say hi.
Oh, hi, hello.
There you go. I didn't realize that if I didn't prompt you, you wouldn't know what to do.
I don't do what I'm like a monkey. I do what I'm told. You know.
let's
type me a novel, monkey.
Let's add that to the job description next episode. And English teacher and home arcade enthusiast. Say hello, Adrian.
I lay my sword before you.
Oh, loyalty extreme.
Nice.
I appreciate it.
I mean,
why
I hope
would I be on his podcast?
Ow, slap in the face.
Wow. And
that's an A+ for friendship and an F- for the podcast.
Oh, wow. And I am a math teacher and sad nostalgia gamer, Charlie. I am hosting today's episode because I decided to foist this novel on you all. But before we get started talking about it, let me give you a nice little summary. So, just like the last book, we start with a nice little prologue from his nephew, or, some relative talking about him, saying it's weird he came back from the dead to chat with him about Mars, and then it gets right into the book. So apparently John Carter was just hanging out being wistful about Mars. It's been 10 years since he came back. But then he feels the feeling, and he gets shot up back to Mars in the same mysterious way he did in the first book. Except when he gets there, he doesn't recognize anything. He's in this weird alien forest that has plant people. Later we discover that it exists in the southern polar ice cap. So that's how you could have a forest and clouds and weather and stuff like that on Mars. But before long, he discovers a bunch of the green men from last book being attacked, and among them happens to be Tarstarchus. And he helps out Tarstarchus, and they escape the plant people and some white apes that have joined to come kill them all by escaping into some cliffs. But it turns out in the cliffs is the entrance to the Temple of Thorns, where they're going to be sacrificed as cannibalistic offers to the people who live in the Temple of Thorns. But they managed to escape.
They're just dinner.
Yeah, they're just dinner. And it turns out in the last book, they briefly mentioned that you don't actually die. Instead, you go on a pilgrimage to the Southern Pole. And it turns out this religion is crap, and it's just sending people as food to these Thorns. But the Thorns are pretty confident and have their own similar thing where they go to the Temple of Isis when they die. But we'll get to that. So, however, on their escape, they meet a woman from the outer world, where all the red people are from the previous book. They meet a princess named Thuvia. And as they escaped during the night, they are attacked by a bunch of airships piloted by the Firstborn. Or who they discover is the Firstborn. They're called the Black Pirates by the Thorns and by the other peoples of Mars. But John Carter manages to make it that Thuvia and Tarstarchus manage to escape, and he boards another Firstborn ship where he manages to take the ship from most of the crew, but he spares the one black pirate that is left, Zodar. And he also saves a Thorn woman, Fidor, who is daughter of the head priest and totally into him. Also, Thuvia was totally into him. Because everyone is totally into him in this book for some reason.
Zodar had the hots for him too, I can tell.
Oh, yeah. But they are overtaken by another ship of the Black Pirates and captured, and they're taken into the Temple of Isis, which actually has a giant hole that leads down into the surface of Mars, where there's a big underground city and even a sea, the Amian Sea. And they are brought before Isis, the god that the Thorns worship. And it turns out she's just a horrible old hag, but all the Black Pirates totally believe she's really a god. And anyone who's allowed to look on her only gets to live a year before they are slaughtered by white apes. And so John Carter is doomed to spend a year in prison and do battles in the arena And Zodar, for having lost a battle, because black pirates only die in battle, they're never taken captured, is forced to be his servant, which is real sad until John Carter, being the manly man that he is, convinces Zodar that, you know what, maybe this whole, like, ISIS is God thing isn't cool, and that you should escape with me. So they're fine with that. And when they're in jail, they happen to meet a palish youth who, when John Carter meets him again on the way to the arena, he discovers also has, like, pretty cool, like, being kind of strong, kind of like John Carter powers. And anytime the youth decides to reveal who his father is, he is conveniently cut off at the last moment.
Dad, it's me.
Four times that happens.
Yep, it's so. But yeah,
Who's
so
your
they go
daddy?
to
Who's your daddy?
Let him get through the summer. It's gonna be a long summer.
That's a long story. So they go to the arena. John Carter gets all upset because they're going to sacrifice, like, this year's servants to the apes. John Carter and his maybe not son that you don't know yet, but it's totally his son. Fight them off, but and the slaves rebel, but everyone is slaughtered. ISIS escapes, and John Carter and his son escape, and they go back to jail. They get Zodar. They escape from Omnia, from the Omnian Sea, and that's when John Carter discovers that this young youth who looks kind of like him and is paler than most of the people he knows is actually Carthoris, his son. And they land in an abandoned city where they happen to run across Thuvia, who's hanging out because Tarstarchus has been taken by another clan of green men. And John Carter goes on a little mission to save him, and he does. And then, as they're escaping from this clan of pursuers, the Helium fleet shows up and saves them all. Yay! And they're brought back to Helium. But it turns out, just days before that, Zat Aris, the jerk from the last book who tried to dethrone Deja Thoris's lineage, has, convinced Deja Thoris to go, essentially go off to do her little thing at the South Pole where you sacrifice yourself, because she was so upset that John Carter's been gone for 10 years and now her son's been gone for about a year. But John Carter comes up with an amazing plan. They're going to, go send all their fleets, go kill ISIS, get back his princess. But John Carter is kidnapped and put in jail. He is eventually saved by his son, and he ends up with the fleet. They have this nice big battle where they fight the Therns, but then the Zazongans under Zat Aris show up to flank them, and all is lost. But then the Firstborn come to attack, but the Therns are freaked out because the Firstborn eat the Therns just like the Therns eat everyone else, and so the Therns and the Firstborn just fight, and John Carter defeats the Zazongans. He flies his feet into Omnia, and there's not many people there because, who would be awesome enough to take on the Firstborn home base? And they sneak into the Temple of Isis where there's a bunch of traps, and John Carter manages to bravely send his soldiers away safely, but he has to escape through many trials of his own. And he goes through a room, and he happens to run across his wife, Deja Thoris. And that is the end of the second to last chapter, because today we are going to play a game where only I have read the last chapter, and everyone else is going to have to make up their own ending before I tell them what happens at the end of the episode.
So thanks for listening, everyone. We're out of time. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.
Hey, Carthoris? Dumb name. Just going to put it out there. two last names, John Carter. Why would you choose to name your kid the combination for two last names?
Yeah, because they
isn't that what the first name is for? It's like John Carter Jr.? I can't say that Junior is any better, but sorry, Jose. Sorry, friends of ours who are named Junior.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Deja Thoris wanted to name her son, right? It was after John Carter, but no, They had to go with John Carter's chosen name, which is a combination of their two last names. So, well,
nowadays they do hyphenated last names, so I guess she didn't want to lose all her influence on her child. Who knows?
So is he Carthoris Thoris? Is that his name? Is his last name? Or is he Carthoris Carter? Or, you know what? We are way off track now. So, the one thing is, we read the first book, Princess of Mars, in our first season of the show a long time ago, before Adrian was on the show. So he, for some reason, decided to volunteer and read both books. So I figured, just give us a short little take on the first book, considering you just read it, Adrian.
It's fine. I think it's definitely in the vein of the boys' literature of the age. It feels very Gulliver's Travels in a kind of anthropological study, right? It's pretty obvious that the green men are kind of Native Americans and the red men are kind of Europeans, I suppose, right? And so it sort of partakes of that tradition from, a while back of the travel narrative, right? With the exception, of course, obviously of John Carter being like super strong as opposed to Gulliver, who's like always weak and dumb in everywhere he goes. Which kind of made the second book start off in an interesting way because like it began with all this like monstrosity, right? So like instead of exploring different peoples, like gave the world a chance to truly alien, but then of course it moves very quickly away from that into something way worse.
No judgment there. By worse, he means something non-judgmental.
Logical thing like a vengeance, and like by a vengeance, I mean in a horrific way. Yeah.
Oh, we'll get there. I left out some key details in my description that we'll get to. So let's, the first book actually had some like cool science ideas of like he's on Mars, so he's super strong because he's used to Earth's gravity, and but he also like can't walk real well because he's too strong for Mars gravity and stuff like that. But this book, there's some like reasonably cool things they did with like the fact that he's on Mars, but did anyone pick up any like neat science stuff to talk about? Was there really anything new?
You'd have to put yourself back there. I don't know if I'd say it was new. I was pleasantly surprised. I guess I was pleasantly. He spends most of the book just covered in like the blood of his enemies, so it's really tough to when you find a nugget of something techie, you're like, oh, here this is. Let me just get the.
Techie for 1913. We had to put on our 1913 bowler hats and think, what did not exist in 1913 that exists in this book? Which is quite a lot. The underground seas and everything like that is kind of fantasy-ish. I won't say it's sci-fi, but it is very fantasy-ish. A lot of focus on the plane battles. It felt like he just took modern, like 1913 naval warfare and just turned those descriptions into airship battles. It's like broadsides of unloading all the guns and then boarding actions and stuff like that.
I mean,
it definitely shows the same.
Brain sizes, if that makes you feel any better in terms of science, but again, in a terrible way. So, phrenology, that's the term I'm looking for. If you bring up phrenology, that's the new science term for this book, right?
There you go.
With the plant man, or is there some other?
With the plant man, but it's an uncomfortable reference given everything else that's happening around it.
Oh, I just took that as like the plant men are basically animals.
Yeah. A lot of people being called animals in this book. So
there's lots of people calling other people animals in this book very specifically. But yeah, the plant man description, I just took as like
everyone is food in this book, and it's just a great circle of life. Is what I got from it. You got very conveniently colored people. It's the black people, the red people, the green people, and then the plant people for vegetarians. In case you like to only eat vegetables.
And the yellow people.
No, yeah, the Therns are the white people. Yeah.
And the yellow people are the progenitor. That's so.
Let's just.
Well, hold on. I have something. There's a brief mention. It's a minor part of the book, but there's a brief mention that the communication between the Therns and ISIS is like via some like wireless communications that cannot be deciphered. Like. There's a brief description of like encryption, essentially encrypted.
Oh yeah, there's that weird thing where they're all handing each other notes and talking to each other across airships because they're like, yeah, eventually wireless communication
codes. Yeah,
code cracking gets so good that doing any form of emitted communication is useless because you will immediately get found out.
Because they can read your mind if you're willing to have them read your mind. That's right. That was always like a Martian tech.
Yeah, they didn't do that much of that in this book. That was much more in the first book, right?
Right.
Yeah. The mind reading.
Yeah.
And ISIS, of course, is Egyptian, right? We agree on that.
We'll get there.
Okay, let's go.
But it's like even when they have this cool like new race that lives underground and stuff like that, and their thing is they steal technology from other people's because they're too good for work because they only live to fight and be pampered.
Well, the black people live underground, like the first people. Right?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah,
but the Therns are also like pampered, and they fit that description too. It's like the red people are the working class, and then you got the white people feeding off of them. You got the black people feeding off of them, and It's like the social hierarchy just keeps going up.
Yep. Like he even ponders, because like in the first book, they do talk about how the red people are red because there used to be like all these different races, but they've interbred so thoroughly. So he does have this pondering thing where he's like, well, I found the black people and I found the white people. Are there still yellow people? And it's just like an aside. I'm like, okay. All right.
Color is what matters.
So
though he does a good job of breaking those color boundaries. Like all his best friends, it's like a one representative from every race. He's like Pokemon. He's got to catch them all.
Yep.
Lots of servants for John Cardwell.
Servants.
Oh, friends.
Are you saying that his red wife is a servant as well? Oh.
Slavery plays a large part of this book.
Yes. Well, in this book, actually, it's much more eating. I'm very surprised in that it is a lot of slavery, but surprisingly, they also like to eat the slaves, which is kind of odd, given that I don't think that it was a thing back in the 1900s to eat your slaves.
I don't know where Burroughs is coming from. Like, he has that line, like, as a Southerner, you'd be surprised that I found, like, the black
people attractive.
Like, really attractive.
That was a grotesque line I was about to mention. I was like, I was recoiling when I read that. I was like, oh my God.
Like, you know, his Confederate past does not come up terribly often, which it also feels really strange for the series, by the way. But that like, he's as a Confederate soldier, right? That feels like a fairly important distinction to make in 1913. But whatever. And then, of course, to bring a whole book about race and religion, sure, very strange.
I feel like he was consciously trying to reject his past by saying the black people were much more advanced than the white people, and like they robbed the white people, and the white people were like scared to death of the black people. Actually, maybe that wasn't so much of him trying to reject his past. Maybe it was just his reality. He actually was really afraid.
Now we're reading it, but I'm sure that, you know what? This is a thing that I'm certain there are lots of essays about if you wanted to get into it. I did not read any. I just read the book and I was like, oh, yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah, for me, the colors were all just interchangeable. Red, white, black, blue. I could have changed them all. And
even the white people were like crazy shut-ins who had evolved to the point where they lost the ability to have hair, so they wore golden wigs to like relive the golden days per se.
Ha ha ha. Da 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 da.
Anyway, so hey, the one Mars.
Yeah, they're all just bald for some reason.
Yeah. Ew, does that mean like that girl who was trying to hit on him was bald that whole time? She just wear a wig?
Yeah. She just looked like a attractive Patrick Stewart.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just think of them all as Patrick Stewart for some reason.
They're all Patrick Stewart. All.
Yeah. So, like the one sciencey thing I had to bring up was, if they're at the South Pole, like, should they really have had like days like you normally do?
Yeah, that was like one of the commentaries, which is that like there's supposed to be sunrises and sunsets, and like, you know, you're supposed to be able to see the moons, and they're like astronomically from the South Pole. You can't see any of that apparently. None of that happens.
It's funny because he like kind of missed out on that planetary science type stuff. But on the other hand, at one point when he's in jail, he counts he's been in jail for like 350 something days. And he's like, okay, Deja Thoris is going to get eaten once this time has run up, once it's been a year. And he comes out and it's been like 360 days. He's like, well, I guess it's already over. But then he remembers like the Martian year is way longer and he has hope again, and they have plenty of time.
Dude, John Carter spends at least 2 years in jail in this book, which is part of the reason why they probably didn't make a second movie, because there's a lot of fucking jail time in this book.
Again,
he spends
why this would not be a very good movie.
He spends a year. He spends a year in Thurn jail, and he spends a year in Redman jail, and before he finally gets a fight, he's like he's fully aged 2 years before the end of this book. This book is so long.
I haven't seen that movie, but were they planning on turning that into a series? Like, how do you? Anyways,
yes, definitely.
They wanted to make a second movie, but the first movie didn't make any money. I feel like
they must skip this book or like make very broad changes or something.
No, they were going to make a movie off of this book if assuming there was enough money. But
just think of how good and long that montage would have been of prison time for 1 year, or actually more than that. He spent a lot of time in prison. That would be pretty great. That would be a great montage. A lot of like
training, like Rocky, just him hitting sides of beef, getting stronger.
Yeah, but like 30 minutes of it, you know, because it's a year long. So.
He spends like a week in the entire first half of the book, maybe. And then it's like, and now he's in jail for a year. And you're like, okay,
2 years. The Therns kept him for a whole year too. It was like, oh my god, and it was crazy.
That wasn't the only time he was in jail. He was jailed for more than that, like on the island and.
Yeah.
It was
all right.
He was doing a tour. He could do a Yelp review of all the jails of Mars. The next book should be called Jails of Mars.
Disney.
Yeah.
You listening?
They didn't even buy the option for the Gods of Mars, so who are we kidding?
Anyways, yeah, also to just talk about the plot of the book, this book uses lots of just random plot conveniences of running into people just at the right time.
That's the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. No matter where you go on Mars, you'll run into a friend. Like when he first gets teleported, hey, my best friend, Tars Tarkus. Hey, there you are. Who would have thought? 1 degree of freedom. Everywhere he goes, just his best friends, every single place. Oh, my son showed up? Oh, convenient.
Yeah. Like they literally escape from the South Pole in a random direction and land like feet away from Thuvia, who escaped like a week ago.
Well, think about that. If they had gone a different direction, he would have just run into his wife, and then the book would have been over. So, I mean, count us lucky we got to read at least a few more pages.
True. Very true.
I think it's important to like keep in mind this was a serialized novel, right? So it was released in chapters like on a monthly or however many basis, right? And so obviously like as a novel, those things feel like super convenient. And I'm sure they felt at the time, but if you imagine you're only able to read this book like a chapter at a time, you need to bind the book together somehow, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that it would probably feel a little bit less convenient if you were reading, because like you'd be really happy that, oh, the character you've been waiting for has come up because it's been so long since you've seen them. Right, you can imagine like it's the first book, like how long since like Sola popped up, for example, right? Yeah, so that I think that helps a little bit, but definitely hurts like in retrospect, right?
The readers have been in jail for 2 years in between chapters, but he got paid what $750 in 1913 bucks. Which, John, how much is that in modern day cash?
I think we decided it was just over 20 grand.
Not bad. He's living large in 1913.
Oh, I don't know. That doesn't sound like a lot of money.
I don't know. 20 years later, the Great Depression would hit. So, like, I don't know. If he kept it in cash underneath his mattress, he could be eating grapes, angry grapes, the grapes of wrath, some might say.
Next book.
he got to make
Sci-fi Grapes of Wrath.
If he's lucky, he'll be drafted into the war. That's really.
If he's lucky, sadness.
Yeah, John Carter 3, he just gets the Spanish flu. So,
oh my god,
that was pretty rough. COVID. Some might say he was a Nostradamus. He predicted COVID.
Oh, what if
a century later?
All right. Anyways, I was about to like write my own book where he brings it back to Mars with him and causes a pandemic, but then it got a little too late.
Oh man.
Fan fiction. Let's read it.
Anyway,
so should we talk about the race thing more explicitly here? Like,
yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Because it's. Wait, let's talk, because we're gonna get there. But like, this is also weirdly tied into like this theme of religious deception. So in the first book, there's this thing where it's just like casually mentioned that like things don't die naturally on Mars. Like that's not the way they evolved. And like I've actually heard in some like biology lectures and stuff like that like dying of old age is actually like a feature, not a fault of evolution, because it lets you like replace your population and you're not just stuck with a bunch of like the old previous generation with their old genes and combinations. So, but on Mars, they don't have this. Instead, they go on like a pilgrimage to the South Pole where they disappear. And what we learn in this book is that there's this race of white bald people in the temple that propagates this religion that then has you get jumped by the plant people and the white apes, and then they just eat you or carry you off to be their slaves. But then they have their own religion where they go to the Temple of Isis to end their lives. But it turns out that the firstborn, who are a bunch of like ebony, so like straight black, beautiful people, as John Carter describes, capture the white Thern people and do the same thing, except they have their god Isis there, who's in charge of everything, and they believe has like legitimate crazy god powers. It's just no one's willing to confront her because they would just be instantly smited,
whatever.
Smited.
Cursed.
It's so interesting because it's like the old red people are going to go be the slaves of the white people. It's like that's like the last population you want to be as slaves. Like the old geriatric population is like, fetch me my slippers. It's too heavy, sir. Like I have scoliosis. It's like, oh man.
They eat most of them, it sounds like.
Yeah. I get old, tough birds are the best meat.
Oh my.
How did Thuvia end up there?
Exactly. What's interesting is that all the slaves that the white people have somehow are young and beautiful, and they're not old and decrepit.
I forget what she does say. She, for some reason, like she went on her pilgrimage. I forget why.
I don't remember why, so it must not have been terribly important.
Exactly. And they have like this cool forest, and they actually have like weather because it's the South Pole, which is like a neat, I mean, just like all of the John Carter series, like not really science, but like a cool idea if you're someone who knows that there are planets and space and someone told you there's canals on Mars. Like this seems like a nice extra extrapolation of an idea. But to mix it with all this like hidden religion cannibalism stuff is really bizarre.
Look, I have two systemic questions here. Number one, like I couldn't quite understand the whole like eating hierarchy thing, like why they needed the plant men to like suck out the blood from the people. So that's one question. And the second question was a little bit more abstract. Like, how did this whole system come about? Like, because in theory, it seems right that all of these races evolved at the same time. So what were like the black pirates just like manipulating the Thurians forever to go and set this up, like to go and create the churches all around Mars, where the Thurians just doing it on their own. The black was like, cool, we can use this to go and like steal from stuff, or do the black pirates not really care about the outside world because they just keep on stealing from the Thurians in terms of all of the guns and ammo that they need?
It's a giant Ponzi scheme.
They say that they have like a passageway to the altar of Isis where they leave like divine messages. So like they are directly informing, like telling the Thurns what to do and giving them their religion.
So I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out like, did the black pirates tell the Thurians to like go and populate themselves throughout the world so that they can go and manipulate the red Martians, or does it just like happening and the black was like, cool, all right, we're just going to exploit that system as it is? Like, how does the hierarchy itself emerge naturally? Because again, no one seems to know, right? Like the Thurians have no idea after millennia of dealing with the black pirates that this is happening to them.
Because even ISIS is manipulating the black people, where she's been like, because again, they're all technically immortal, but they essentially all the black pirates either die in battle or the women are just eventually sacrificed because getting old is lame. So like ISIS is apparently like, are you asking like how did she manage to set all of this up in the start?
Sure, yeah.
You know what?
Because if we're going to talk about it as a religious critique, right? Like religions are systems, and sure they emerge organically, right? That's totally fair. But there usually is some kind of like guiding hand which goes and sets up the hierarchies, right? By which the power is distributed. That seems to be one of the critiques here, right? That the power here is being wielded unfairly, and that's a problem for Burroughs, and he wants to kind of address the problems of a religion that has too much control over the people. But everything here seems to come out like so organically that like this stuff bothers me way more than like running into your son in the middle of a dungeon, right? Just out of sheer.
Oh yeah. There's way more problems with that. Anyway, Vincent.
I mean, I guess I see some of that like obscurity, the kind of the black curtain that you never see behind, like the Wizard of Oz kind of thing. I think it happens in a lot of religious churches in general. It's like who chooses the Pope, who chooses all like, the cardinals, who chooses like, the major leaders of major religions. Mm-hmm. The common person is not voting for the Pope.
Sure.
I mean, nobody chooses who the Pope is. The Pope somehow they go, the cardinals go in a cloister and God inspires them, and then the Pope is chosen. Like there's a lot of like interesting parallels, I guess, to religion where like the common red man, if I would call us the red man, like we don't know how like ISIS gets chosen. It's interesting that, but I mean, their situation is different in that like if you're not of the right class, you get eaten by the class above you, and ISIS being the top consumer of all of them, essentially. Like I don't know how that happens in a world, but at the same time, we've also had presidents and other leaders who we don't necessarily like know how they got where they got to be. We might argue that they were much more complicated political and economic kind of background arguments going on. I don't know. It's as implausible as it seems. Other implausible things have happened in this world, which I still can't explain.
Problem with that sense that like, oh, the red Martians don't know what's going on. This is all very like time machine, right? But the time machine, there is a pretty clear logic of like why it is that like the power is equated with like eating people essentially, right? Because the Morlocks, they have nothing underground, so they go and they take of the Eloi, they eat them. That makes perfect sense to me. It's like a nice simple system. This system is like there are so many levels of ornate obfuscation here, right? And unlike the Pope, right, which is an intentional obfuscation, right? Like it's incredibly hard to imagine how this system ever came about because it's extremely old, right? And just is so needlessly complex. Like, why don't the Black Pirates just go out and raid the Red Martians and take whatever they want to? Like, why keep the Thurians around at all?
It sounds like they do because they also have like, Red Princess slaves and whatnot, and they've got Dejathors.
I guess it's a system. It's like why would you go and like tax the honeybees when you can have like the beekeeper send you honey at Whole Foods, kind of deal. It's like screw going to the hives directly. Like I'll have my middleman take care of it. That's what it kind of struck me as in terms of the black man, white man, red man hierarchy, and arguably the red man, green man hierarchy. I guess red man, green man combined.
I think the only reason that we get is that like the Black Pirates like fucking with the Thurians, right? They're just like that they're just like fun to fight, and so like we just keep them around to keep on fighting this like million-man army around. By the way, stupid that they're like around around the land when the pirates are from inside the land. These Thurians are absolutely terrible when it comes to like strategic decision making, but whatever, fine.
I'm confused about this. Are the Green Men also following this religion?
Yeah, they are.
Oh yeah, but they get rejected immediately.
Yeah, that's the hilarious thing where the Green Men aren't even worth eating or taking as slaves, like to the point of where when they capture Sola, they just push her off an airship. It's like, really?
Would you eat green eggs and ham? No, I would not. No, I would not, Sam. I am.
It might be a little wrong because they're the only ones. Like it's my understanding. Like they call everyone human. Even the green men are called humans at some points. So everybody on Mars is human, and they're all given colors. But the only color that is rejected, and specifically the only color of human on Mars that doesn't actually look like John Carter. All the rest of them look in some ways similar to John Carter. Is the Green Men of Barsoom. Like they're all like tusks, and they have double sets of arms. Like what's the choice there? That the Green Men are very different than everyone else.
Orcs are like a human, like subconscious stereotype. Everyone was born with the idea of what an orc was supposed to look like. Apparently, so same with burrows.
I mean, they're not orcs because orcs are coded as like black, right? Like, which is another problem for Dungeons and Dragons and such, right? I mean, these are the Green Men are noble savages. They're Native Americans, and what the Black Pirates want is like cultured and technologically advanced servants, right? People who can help make their guns and make their ammunition, because again, they will not do so. People who can serve in like a priestly caste, which they don't think the Green Martians can do.
To me, it almost sounds like kind of like one of those military juntas, like that take over a country, like like a general warlord takes over the country. It's like, I don't want to like make up guns or anything like that. I'll just kidnap my soldiers, kidnap my slaves, and take everything from the country that rightfully belongs to me. It strikes me a little bit more of kind of like a African warlord kind of situation. I think like Joseph Kony or something like that.
Yeah. I mean that does get us into the racism issue here, right? I mean, yes.
Yeah. Since we're talking about the whole race kind of thing, it's kind of crazy.
Yes. It is weird that because it's like in the first book, it seems weird that he brings up like the green race and like the red race being this kind of amalgam race in the end. But it's like, okay, but that's kind of like a neat idea for a like kind of far end civilization or something like that that's colonized the whole planet. This is just working stuff out. This is weird.
Again, the red men feel very European, right? Because they're part of this like ornate culture that's like falling apart, right? So it's their ancientness, which is both what makes them attractive, but also what makes them in need of the American who's going to come in and rejuvenate the society. Which is of course what he does, right? Like that virility, that again to be very clear, that southern virility that he brings, right, is what will come in and fix the problems nation, like because like whatever you will say about the Southern, they can fight really well, right? And that's what this world requires. There's like men of action. Because everything here is like trying to be shored up against like environmental destruction and the decay over time. Yeah, and in the first book, that's a bit clearly more coded as like an anthropological concern. Here, I have no freaking clue what to make of what's going on racially in that book.
When you were bringing up like kind of the mechanics of how this all happened, I feel like this is very much just like say like Temple of Doom, where it's just like we just need a place for him to go have an adventure. Like yeah. So let's just make everything screwed up. Everyone is cannibals. He's the one who's going to fix it. Like, he's the one who's going to break through their perceptions of stuff. And, like, I feel like it's more... all these weird details and stuff like that are more to, like, set up the conflict that eventually he's going to get in a giant airship battle for, rather than it being, like, a thing of actual interest of commentary of any sort.
Was Superman, Clark Kent, also a Southerner? Like, I think he was born in, like, Kansas. Does Kansas count as, like...
Kansas
doesn't count as a deep
territory.
South. Disputed territory. He's questionably Southern. All the Superman.
I mean, he's Midwestern, right? He is coded as, like, rural, you know, like, at a moment when America is transitioning to a more urban setting, right? So he has a claim to, like, a more originary sense of Americanness than like, say, Lois Lane does, for example.
Okay. I'm just wondering if all Southerners or all Supermen are essentially of Southern descent. Apparently, you just come from another planet and you're Superman. That's a general rule. Superman came from Krypton and John Carter came from Earth.
That might be an interesting podcast. Southern heroes through literature.
I would not participate in that podcast. I am out.
5 became 4, and then 4 became 3.
For those who watch like Birth of a Nation, I am out from that point. It's not.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, like the converse of that, right? Again, which is so weird to think about in terms of the historical moment here is like H.G. Wells in The War of the Worlds, right? Where being for the world is actually a liability because the fucking plants kill you, right? In that book, which is another trope that like is running slightly parallel to the Superman notion.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'd argue that we've brought up H.G. Wells a couple of times now, right? Where it's like clearly he's writing allegories for deeper themes, whereas this is more just like pulp. Like, what if you got sent to Mars and you were super strong? I figure it's just even though it's like
so much,
quote, even though it's quote the same genre, it's like it's towards totally different aims. It's kind of like how Jules Verne is more like futurism versus H.G. Wells, which is more interested in these kind of using it as a setting for these sociological dramas.
So I wouldn't say that these are the same genres, actually. I think that Burroughs' books, for the most part, sort of really fit themselves into boys' literature, which was like an entirely different class of stories, although they kind of become combined up to this point, which is all about like, ideological transmission of what it means to be like a man, right? Like that's not absolutely the case in, say, like The Time Machine, where the main character kind of like wanders around all the time. It's why they had to like really punch up the action for that movie from like, was it 2008 or whatever it was?
That's the Guy Pearce one?
Yes, where they're like he just like beats up that Morlock for no reason at the end of the movie, where he's like, "You can go home." He's like, "Nah, I'm gonna fist fight you for 20 minutes at the end for no reason." So like the whole notion of these boys literature books, right, is like it's a reaction to this moment at the end of the 19th century, moving into the 20th, where there is this like great fear that like specifically the British are becoming like a weaker stock because of civilization. And so these texts from the Victorian era forward are always about kind of like, on the one hand, becoming more in touch with your primal masculinity. On the other hand, like this projection of like the chivalrous warrior, right? Which is, of course, everything that's happening in the first book, and how like everybody here is like totally cool with like enslaving yourself to like a morally upright man, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that also very like Teddy Roosevelt turn of the century, like American man type stuff too. Like this is going on. All right.
Yeah. Right. This is why the women can't help but follow John Carter. He's like he's an upright man, and that's what happens to upright men. And this is how we get into incel stuff. And we'll for a moment. Yeah.
Anyways, yes. Any other comments? All right. Let's move on to our game then of guess the ending. So I had you guys read to the final chapter. So I figured, you will find out what happens at the very, very end. But let's see how did you think this ends? Vincent, what is your plan for the end of this book? He just breaks into the palace. His soldiers are going through underground, and he meets up with Dejathoris. What happens next?
Osiris appears and fights Isis for supremacy of the Egyptian pantheon. John Carter dies. Dejathoris weeps over his grave. No, I'm just kidding. That's like the exact opposite of what happens. John Carter's got to kill all the bad guys. He's got to be the hero. So John Carter gets his wife. Carthoris probably shows up. All his best buddies probably show up somehow, magically teleported through some magical teleport. Taurus Tarkus shows up. Carthoris shows up. Everyone, through the power of friendship, ends up killing Isis. And John Carter is now the new god of Mars. All the races bow in allegiance to John Carter, who has unified all of Mars. That's the simple ending.
Yes,
done.
That's pretty much what I projected as well. John, how about you?
Similar. Yeah, I mean, I don't. Well, I guess it. Although he has to hold himself back. I think. I don't know. I think to keep up the theme of a model man. At the moment when he could kill Isis and rage, there's no longer a need for rage because Deja's alive. So obviously now he'll have to reunite. Perhaps. I don't know. Either that or Taurus Tarkus comes in and murders her in one sentence.
In one sentence. It's not even an action. It's just a sentence.
Taurus Tarkus is the one character who has had no contact with any of this. I mean, Adrian,
Taurus Tarkus always shows up at the right time. Whenever you think Taurus Tarkus is not going to show up, boom, there's Taurus Tarkus.
John Carter just appears on Mars within feet of Taurus Tarkus.
Mm-hmm.
At the start of the book. Adrian, what happens?
I just want to point out a few things here. First of all, I think it's weird the way that humans are currency in this text, right? I think that feels important to bring up, and also the it's a bit of a turn on how death oriented this whole planet is, right?
A turn or a thurn? Just kidding.
Oh my!
And I'm done for the night. Just that sense of so much of why this planet seems to function is that they have this very strong belief in an afterlife. So one question I don't trust the book to deal with is how do you live in that space when all of a sudden your sense of what an actual afterlife is disappears overnight, as opposed to a slow version of secularization. What's going to happen? I mean, for sure, John Carter is going to kill the goddess of the afterlife, and he mentions again the weird rich thing, colonizing the South Pole with the Red Martians, which sure,
colonize the South.
Yeah, it's only monsters and savages here, he says. So, which again, great look for a Southerner to go and do here at this moment. Sorry, be a Confederate, right? Because that is exactly who he is. He'll kill her. I mean, the beginning of the book mentions, right, that the natural lifespan of a marsh is 1,000 years. So it's pretty clear that all the major characters must survive and get to live their 1,000 years of life. Somewhere in there, he must discover the secret of being able to transport himself at will. I'm sure there is some kind of last-minute disaster with the water level rising, because they do mention that the Black Pirates do control the waters of Mars, essentially. And so I wonder if that's a last move by the goddess to mess with the Red Martians and hold them hostage. But again, it all has to be resolved because John Carter shows up at the beginning of the book, right? And is able to give the account of what happens. One of the funny issues with both the serialization of a novel, but also this retrospective telling, right? Which was, again, for a long time, one of the early models of what a novel would look like, because we didn't quite have like fully robust model. Although by this point, those would have been much more cemented, that sense of like some kind of omniscient narrator. The whole series harkens back to a much earlier version of the novel, which also feels kind of strange to me.
And book 3, I forgot to predict this, should definitely be a Princess of Venus.
What, would he just show up there and instantly melt into a puddle of acid and be compressed by burning hot air? Anyways, so
tell us how it ends, Charlie. I've been dying.
So what actually happens? So, like, he's going to the castle. He's going to save Deja Thoris because, I mean, did they bring up the whole like Temple of the Sun thing by this point, where it's like the room, like okay, because that like she's threatened that they're going to toss Deja Thoris into this thing that only one there's only one room open each day, and it has rooms for all of the year, so you have to wait till the next year for your room to come back up. And it's clear that Isis uses this as a torture chamber, so what she'll do is like throw someone in there with only like half a year's worth of food, so they go slowly insane and then starve to death or something like that. So it's that's the threat on Deja Thoris. So he shows up and he feels all happy Deja Thoris is there, and they have this like touching reunion and stuff like that. But then he hears fighting in the hallways, and he goes like, "I must go." And he hides her in the like little, passageway that he came in through, trusting she'll be safe. And he runs off to the big fight where he finds his own army of helium fighting with the firstborn men. And he joins them in fighting, and they start pushing him back. And there's this like crazy fight, and he describes how awesome it is. But then, like, more airships land, and the green men are raiding the Temple of Isis. So it looks like the day is clearly won. So he goes back to Deja, but she's gone. So he runs through the Temple of Isis and finds Isis's throne room. And he slaughters her guards and, essentially, like, captures her with a knife. And the other firstborn are like, "Oh, you fool, she'll just smite you down." And he yells at them that, no, she's a fraud. Look, she can't do anything. And the guards are like, do it. And instead she just starts clawing at him like a pathetic hag. And he's like, look at what BS you guys have been believing in. I'll let you guys deal with this. And he just tosses her to them. But she reveals that not only has she thrown Deja Thoris into this sunroom thing, she also threw in Phaida and Thuvia, like all these women who are totally into them.
Cool.
So all of them into the room at the same time with only enough food to last them half the year, so that eventually like one of them will have to eat the other two to survive.
The theme of the book, eating people.
So he throws Isis to the guards, who are not impressed with her being a gross old hag, and he runs off to the sunroom, which apparently like the room's still open. There's just bars that you can't move. So he has this like goodbye to his wife, and some soldiers show up, and they're all like tossing a bunch of extra food in there so that they'll be fine through the year. And it's like
at the bars, you just toss food.
They're bars.
Yeah, so like, that's what they do. It's like you think it's great. They're tossing food in there, and Thuvia's like, "I love you, but now I met Deja. I think I get it. Whatever, right?"
I'm next to your wife, but I love you.
Yeah. And Fidor is like, "No, you're the only one for me, so you'll be there for me when it's over." And he's like, "We already went over this. Like, I love my wife. We can't do this, right?" And so the book ends with like, just as the last sliver of the door is closing, he sees Fidor pull out a knife and lunge at Deja. But then Thuvia jumps in the way, so like the book ends with he hears a scream and he assumes his wife is dead, and he has to be dragged kicking and screaming as apparently the firstborn are burning down the Temple of Isis behind them, and they have to escape. And that's the end of the book.
What an ending!
There's no conclusion to his life.
There's no resolution. It just leaves you for the next book.
What a cliffhanger!
Wow.
Yeah,
Again,
he was desperate for money. He needed that serialization.
Oh my gosh! All the women are literally dying.
It's like The Bachelor. Only the women have to kill each other, and only the last one lives.
God.
So when I read that, I was like, "No, you read right up to the end, because it'll take way too much time for me to like explain." Like, because I was going to have you guys stop before the airship battle and all this other stuff that feels like would be the natural climax of like, we did it. But then I got to that, and I was just like, "Holy crap!"
I have to say that goes into the surprise ending of the year category. I don't think we're going to have another one that for such a straightforward series. I thought that it would be straightforward in an ending, but no.
Well, it's straightforward in terms of being, again, a serial novel where you need people to keep on being interested in by the next edition.
But not for the last chapter of a goddamn book. Like this makes sense for chapter like 15, not chapter like 20.
I assume this was so. Isn't Foundation also like this, where it's like he wrote all these stories and then they're kind of compiled into 3 books?
So that it's a slightly different thing where, as far as I know, and I could be wrong about this, they were actually like shorter stories in a larger thing, not therefore like a chapter by chapter progression.
Yeah.
You know, like there was always the possibility for like other stories in between the Foundation stories, for example. Whereas this right is like a fully mapped out like one chapter a month sort of thing.
Like this is more like how Dickens did it back in the day.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's the ending. Let's get to our favorite thing, least favorite thing part of the podcast. Since we're just chatting, Adrian, why don't you go first?
Man.
One of the good things. Damn.
Favorite thing.
Man, if Adrian was the last person to go, it's like, oh, all the good things were taken already. I could understand. So he's the first one. It's like a lowest lying fruit. There are no fruit. It's a barren tree.
I was talking earlier about like how disconcerting it is to not have a fully formed opinion of this text, in part because it is such it's an artifact, obviously, of sci-fi history in a way that Foundation was, but I think Foundation is a far more like fully formed text, for example, right? And there's a lot of interesting things going on. Like this is such a text which is designed for a certain purpose and fulfills its purpose so like directly that it's kind of hard to look past that, right? In terms of not just being this like straightforward adventure thing, it's meant to titillate you and kind of keep you buying the editions, but also to pass along certain ideologies, you know, and those ideologies are like painfully obvious throughout, obviously, except for perhaps like whatever's going on with race in this book, which is a bit of a mystery to me. I really like the beginning, I think, of the book. I think starting off with this very different tone of like John Carter encountering like actual monstrosity and alienness, as opposed to all of these analogs of human races and human cultures that he does in the first book. That's a really cool start, and I'm kind of sad that the book didn't really continue on that trend. In many ways, like I'm kind of surprised that the book didn't really kind of follow up on many of its major kind of ideas or what it's known for. Like, for example, the religion idea is barely touched on. It's a fairly underdeveloped thing. And same thing with like the plant men, for example, which is a really cool thought. So yeah, I really like that. What I did not like, it's not my impulse to the race thing, which is actually not true. Because I think that there's obviously the possibility of using the book as a kind of interesting cultural artifact of the time to be thinking through it. I just feel like so much of the book is really underdeveloped, and so like in general, like I'm not happy with just like the way that the book is written, because again, like it's so much like a monthly thing that it kind of doesn't allow for some greater cohesion, you know, and that's unfortunate because there are some really interesting ideas that this raises, and there's all this potential for the book to really be a marker of its time, and I don't think it is. Like I think there's a reason why we'll talk about Foundation, right, for all this time, but not really about John Carter as much anymore.
All right, John, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Adrian stole so much of my thunder here.
This is why you're only going first. I told you.
There's an advantage. There's an advantage. So I think that this. So I really liked the first book, but the novelty from this book has the first book had a novelty in that it placed itself at a time before we understood a lot about the solar system. It dated itself because there was the possibility of what was on Mars, because our ability to understand, our ability to see the surface, our ability to see in high focus, just our ability to understand what was going on in that part of the solar system beyond Earth was pretty unknown. So there was like an open canvas there, and I thought that was a pretty interesting idea that was followed by the author. But in this book, it's really lost its sheen, I think, because there isn't a lot new here for the tech enthusiast. It's not a lot of extra sci-fi. So my favorite part of the book was also the beginning of the book, which was the the plant people are pretty innovative and frankly just alien in the book, and they're different. Everybody else is what did you say, an analog? It's really good. I want to use that word because it's so good. They're a derivative of somebody. They're meant to be someone, and it's like very obvious as a parallel to like, oh well, this is supposed to be white people, or this is supposed to be Europeans or something. And it's just the idea of something so different was a refreshing part of the book. What didn't I like about the book, or what do I want to mention that I didn't like about the book? There's no consistency. So he doesn't. He focuses on some stuff but it's not the same as he calls up a character whenever he wants it. Like, I need, so and so I'm gonna have, we're gonna run into Thuvia or whatnot. But like, for instance, Tars Tarkas is both like at any moment. I know I'm very stuck on Tars Tarkas, but I like him as a character. Sure. Like at any given moment, he is like taken by other green men and possibly killed or imprisoned. And suddenly it's like, hey, we really need us a big army. Tars, what do you got? Oh, okay, I can go ahead and I can unite all of the tribes and bring 1 million men to battle with you right now. We're going to fight for the red men right now. Like, I don't get it. I don't understand. It doesn't seem believable to me.
To be fair, it's 500,000, not 1 million.
He can only get 500,000.
Way easier. Come on, John. I can get 500,000 tomorrow.
Tars is the guy he looks to. He's like, I need something. And Tars is like, sure, whatever you need. I got it. What, 500,000 men tomorrow? Yes, got
it. Excellent. And Vince, how about you?
So this is interesting, actually. So when I read the first book, Princess of Mars, I didn't really particularly like it that much because I thought it was just so convenient, and I gave it a lot of credit for being an old book, from the turn of the century, literally from the 1900s, like the first decade of the 1900s. Having anything sci-fi to me from back then just struck me as like, hey, pretty good job. You tried hard. Not even my grandpa was like, a writer back then. It'd be like my grandpa's grandpa. Like, you're talking like generations ago. What was interesting was that like this book is solidly like what I would call one of those B movies, mystery science theater, kind of movies that you would review. I went into it with low expectations, and those low expectations were met. So I think from a pro side of things, like in many ways, I wasn't looking for high science fiction, writing style. I wasn't looking for a really complicated plot. I just want to see what happens to John Carter. I mean, I heard what happened in the first book. Let's see what happens in the second book. It's just more like a familiar character. I just want to see what the end of the story was. And so the pro was that, it kind of delivered. It's like, I expected James Bond. I got James Bond. He beats up a bunch of guys who are clearly somehow weaker than him. Somehow he is like blessed with super strength, just like Superman. And I was just kind of reading along, and I never assumed that he would ever die or anything bad would happen to him. It was kind of like reading a Superman comic book, I guess. So that was the pro. So it was just fun. Easy time killed, and the book was free. And that's the other thing I'll point out to our listeners is that the book is so old that it's free on the Gutenberg Project. So if you look up on Google Gods of Mars, you can legally read the book online for free. So it's not going to be a waste of your money. It's just an issue of whether or not you find it a waste of your time. So it kind of brings me into the whole concept situation, which is that like there are many books that we have read this season which are better, I would say, than this book in terms of sci-fi. Leviathan Wakes and many other books, which we gave really bad reviews of. If I had to put them head to head, I would say Leviathan Wakes clearly is a better sci-fi book in terms of being more interesting and more engaging. But Gods of Mars never portrayed itself as like a New York Times bestseller, like the way Ready Player 2 did. It never portrayed itself as a Netflix, billion dollar generating revenue kind of book. It's this kind of B series, low kind of series book. And as a result, the writing's not, I would say the language is kind of good. I kind of enjoyed the flowery kind of Southern language for just about every single race, regardless of whether or not they were supposed to be educated or not. But generally the book was pretty contrived. I mean, people popping out, like his buddies popping out in every corner whenever he comes in trouble, like ex machina, like everything saving his ass. There's no way he was ever going to die. Like there's no suspense in that sense. In that sense, the ending was kind of out of the blue. I did not see that one coming. But yeah, con wise, it's not high sci-fi. It's not provoking enough that I would say like this changed my changed my view of how science fiction should be written or read, or gave me new ideas for like, how I view like the world, or like, how I should interact with my fellow humankind. Like, oh man, I should definitely avoid eating Adrian. God, well, what a terrible idea. Like I didn't really gain anything from the book. In some ways, it was definitely a waste of time in that sense, except for the pure enjoyment of seeing what happened to John Carter next. The end. That's it.
Wait, you didn't learn not to eat Adrian, or you didn't?
Oh, double negatives. I'm definitely eating Adrian tomorrow. Slow cook rotisserie style. No, yeah, I'm definitely not eating any of you guys. God.
I mean, can we do a social distance backyard party if we're doing that, Vince?
Oh, who's going to be on the grill?
I mean,
like literally on the grill?
Literally. There you go.
Anyways, yes, Adrian.
I was gonna say, I mean, this book is one of the reasons why you have all of that like anti-intellectualism of the the 30s and 40s, where it's like, well, reading is bad because the books like these are on the one hand seen as empty calories, right? On the other hand, do project a certain ideology, right? And so they're like doubly dangerous in that respect, where they kind of like distract people from like actually engaging in good literature, right? While on the other hand, like just training people to think in a certain way.
Yep.
Adrian, are you doing the whole Don Quixote? The plot is the dangers of reading literature when it is, in fact, one of the first works to popularize that form of literature?
I mean, I think that argument is. I mean, people have made that argument. I'm not a big believer in it, to be honest.
I know. I just think it's funny.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it's more complicated than it has to do with like thinking about like medieval tropes and like moving from one version of literature to another. That's a more interesting argument.
It's just funny. It's like, oh, this argument's going on for centuries. But anyways, I guess I'll get my thoughts. I'll try to keep this fast. I'll start with my negatives. Negatives were, like at least the first book, part of what made it kind of delightful is this novel attempt at trying to be like kind of sciencey with like the gravity is weaker and so much stronger. Like even like, the planet is dying. Here's what's happened to the culture. Like, on top of being just this kind of dumb adventure novel, like that made it a lot more fun, even if a lot of it was just pure nonsense, especially with like today's knowledge of science. But this one, besides the very start of it, it's like just the whole, we're going to have this weird like fake religion upon fake religion culture thing going on. I was just kind of like, yeah, okay, fine. Let's just get to like crazy airship battles and him fighting in arenas or whatever. But my positive was, as Adrian put it, I was thoroughly titillated the whole book through. Even if there was things like, well, my father is, and then the guard showed up, and you're just like, oh, it's stupid stuff like that. And occasionally it's fun having stupid stuff like that. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't know if I'd recommend it because it is just kind of dumb adventure, like dumb, dated adventure fun with maybe some like questionable things that could just make it real awkward if you're not prepared for it. Yeah, definitely when I got to the whole, like, here's the description of the Therns, I was like, what is happening in this book? But
old bald white people.
Yeah, but when I finished the last chapter, I was really tempted to like sit down and start reading the next book, and I was like, okay, you know what? You got the points for that.
He earned another $750 in the bank.
Hey, I bought like a giant fat version that has the first 3 Barsoom books, so I can move on to the next one as soon as I want to. But we're not reading the next Princess of Mars John Carter book next month. We are going to read Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. So, be prepared to read that. We should be posting at the first of every month. So, we will see you then.
We're going to guess the ending to that one too, right?
I don't know. We'll decide what we're doing. Say goodbye, buddy.
Starburst, come back. We miss you.